I have known Hemant for many years now. He has worked across several sectors, including education, client and agency side roles, and more recently as an entrepreneur championing the transformative impact of design. For the Those Who Design series, I invited him to discuss his current passion and venture, Honest Structures, which is a unique modular and sustainable system framework to look at product design, specifically furniture, and its relevance to consumption, form, function, standardization, and customization in the Indian context. I've always found Hemant's vision to come up with design solutions to clear problem statements as compelling as his drive to see them through to actual application, making, and deployment to make for meaningful impact using design as a transformative tool. So my question to you is, beyond just form and function, right? How do you think about the transformative impact of design in your work? And tell us a little bit about how Honest Structures came into being in that story.
Every time the subject of design thinking comes up, I refer to it very simply as creative problem solving. Right? It's something that can be applied to anything that we do, not just designing products or spaces. Can be applied to any industry. Now, as specifically when it relates to our work is informed by our time. Right? It's the product of our time. It's defined by the needs of our time, our constraints, and to a very large extent, our responsibility as well. When we were thinking about Honest Structures as a company, sort of even before the idea was fully formed, one of the sort of critical defining factors was the fact that on this planet today, we already have too much stuff. Right? So really, we don't need much more stuff. If you look at our landfills, look at fast fashion and what that does to us, at the furniture that's produced by some of the biggest names in the world, that's produced by underpaid people in different parts of the world. We're still talking about things being recyclable or non-recyclable. It's quite honestly, it is shameful that the conversation has not moved farther than that, and we felt that it has to stop. And just saying that it must stop will not make it so, right? So somebody had to do something about it. So this was a personal test for us, and not just in terms of product or how it looks, but the financial model, the strategic thinking behind it. Ergonomics, all of it, whatever, right? It's everything that's kind of has to be encapsulated, and that's how we feel the change happens. And that's what I believe we're doing here at Honest Structures.
Tell me how, by design, you think, and specifically product and furniture design in this case, and via conduit like Honest Structures, that you think that you or the team could make a difference?
So one thing in the product world that everybody struggles with, this is not just furniture, is that the end of life of a product is typically very complex. Right? So if you think about the way products are put together, if you look at your phone, the computer that we're talking on, the table one might be sitting at, the shoes that we wear, they're made to last reasonably long, but they're not made to be taken apart. And one of the biggest constraints to recycling is the fact that it's impossible to do it inexpensively enough. So if you have to work very hard to separate a product into its constituent parts, so the rubbers, the plastics, the metal, what have you, then nobody's going to do it because it's not cost effective. It's just simple economics. So I think it is imperative that as designers, at the time that we are creating a product, we have to be mindful of the end of life as well, right? And everything that goes in between. So one quick example of how we thought about it was that we must have the minimum number of materials in our product. All of our products are one material, like it's all steel. We have no welds and we have no glues, right? So everything is put together mechanically and everything is finger tightened. Means that when you need to separate it, you separate it with your fingers. You don't need any special tools. When you separate it out into its constituent parts, then you have components that are eminently recyclable themselves, right? So we have limited the scope, in a way, our palette of materials so sharply and so sort of abruptly, precisely in order that we can influence how things will turn out, 10 or 20 years from now.
So I'm just curious to get your thoughts about what you think about design in India. Does India afford you certain things or certain a certain ecosystem that the other, or other environments may not have? Or is it simply the fact that in a country like India, you must do this because of the mass consumption that you chose to start in India?
When I look at the rate of consumption in India, I feel that it is going to be tremendous with sort of changing lifestyles and changing aspirations. And it felt like absolutely the right moment in time to do this in India in order to make the biggest change or the biggest impact. The biggest advantage, I think, that we have in India is that we have the opportunity to learn from the mistakes of others. Right? So as designers and educators, maybe the biggest thing that we can bring to the table is effective communication. And that kind of brought me back to a book that was written a while ago. This was in the 80s, called Technology and World Civilization. And in it, it talks about India being one of the 3 original centers of excellence in the world when it came to materials and technology and means and methods, right? And so I would love to see us bring that back. I really liked what you said about Made in India or Make in India. That we must create in India, not just manufacture, right? We have the ability to do it, and I think this is the time for it.
Are you encountering, or did you encounter any challenges in the Indian ecosystem there, either in the design or the production of these pieces?
So I think we've had the good fortune to work with people who are who know what they're doing. Right, so our products are not made by a furniture company. They're actually made by people who make medical devices and telecommunications equipment. Everything is sort of very precise. Everything has to be made to a certain standard. And you're right, in some ways, it is almost the opposite of handcrafting. Although there is a very interesting story here that even though our processes are automated, right? So we use laser cutting for everything, and we use robotic folding or bending for the steel pieces to give them 3-dimensionality and strength. There is a difference. You do notice a difference when there are certain people who are operating or running those machines. So there's actually a lovely relationship that the operator of the machine has with the process. Some people just know the machine, and it's like 2 sort of beings working in tandem or working together. And believe it or not, you can actually tell the difference in the results as well.
Talk to us about the school a little bit, how the client came to you, what was the brief, and how you set about using this systems approach to kind of talk to them or finalize the brief?
When we think about it, we think of it as Lego. It's the simplest way of describing it, right? So Lego is basically a system made of a few simple looking pieces. And you can take these simple pieces and you can make lots of different things with it. It's very flexible in that way. And the results really depend on your creativity and your imagination, which is what we do. So Manavika's school, which you had mentioned, was actually very interesting because it almost didn't happen. We were showing our products at kind of a design showcase here in Goa, and the chairman of the school sort of happened to come by, and he looked at one of the products that we were displaying, and it was basically a little stool that we make. So he sort of got it, and we had a lovely conversation there, and he said, I wish we'd actually met before, because we run this progressive school in Goa, and I went to it. It's really a lovely place. I mean, the faculty, the administrator, chairman, everybody. You see happy children sort of running around, and that's always a good sign. They had recently finished refurbishing major portions of the school, but they had 2 spaces that still remained. One was the arts and crafts facility, and the other one was their cafeteria. And they said, we'd really like you to do this, and we'd like to see what you can do with it. And that was lovely because there was already this sort of a trust sort of established. They could see that the stuff we were talking about was embodied in the product, and they wanted to see what we could do with it. So they got us together with their arts and crafts faculty. We met with them here in Goa. We showed them a bunch of other stuff. And then we started sort of designing the space together. The entire space is basically kind of the HS system. And the cool thing is that they can always add to it or subtract from it anytime they want. And so we've kind of handed them something that is almost a kit of parts, fully assembled, of course, but still it's something that they can make their own. And I think that's the best part of this sort of systems approach.
From a spatial standpoint, are there still big moves that you make as a designer, and does the system allow you to do it?
So our approach with creating a system was not to say that one size fits all. In fact, all of our products can be tailor-made or tailored to your requirements. So in terms of sizes, we can make things longer, we can make things shorter, and we can change the materials or color. And the approach that we follow allows us to do this where it doesn't cost you any extra. And I've always wondered, why do we always make things in standard sizes? Right? Because there is no such thing as a standard. All the people on this call are different people. They're not standard people. And the reason that it's happened this entire time is because the way companies or industries have thought and sort of practiced manufacturing comes from a time when there was an incredible amount of scarcity. So think of the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, right? So things went from being made by hand, and they were expensive and time consuming. And now you could make them with machines, and you could pop them out by the thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions, and they suddenly became affordable. Now that was a need of its time because scarcity was a problem. What we started out saying is that scarcity is not a problem anymore, right? Quantity is not a problem, but the quality of living is a problem. So when we developed our system, it allows us in code instantly to change the dimensions and therefore the functionality of things. And so from the beginning, our system allows us to tailor things to specific requirements.
Do you have the ability to integrate maybe one more material or something softer or something which is easier on the edges for, say, a school?
In India especially, there's a tremendous opportunity for us to work with people who make soft materials at a small scale. So if you look at the range of textiles and sort of handmade products or handicrafts that we have here, could we not use some of that? We are speaking to an organization that makes mats out of discarded plastic bags. Right? And these are beautifully woven mats. In fact, the first time I saw it, I didn't know what they were made of. And so some of these are silver because they've taken potato chip packets, turned them inside out, turned them into yarn, and now they're weaving mats out of them. So we'll take some of those and turn them into soft surfaces. Here in the US, we'll do it with US made materials.
Do you feel that because the system looks a certain way, this could get old or limiting? Meaning, let's say if I saw a picture of a classroom which you did a certain way and I saw Cora, I would recognize it roughly in a similar way. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
How do you bring in that differentiation?
I would actually love it if nobody ever noticed our products and if they simply faded away into the background. Because what I'd like to see in an arts and crafts facility is arts and crafts happening and a bunch of happy kids, right? And happy teachers. What I'd like to see in a Cora showroom is stuff by Cora, because that's really why you're there. You're there to buy a really nice pair of jeans, for example. And if I walk into kind of a design studio, I would like to see a certain enthusiasm and sort of, whatever in the air. I think it would be great if our products kind of were so good at what they did that that you didn't even notice them, right? So they become secondary to what the function of that space is. And what we feel is that because the parts are not, or because the components are our products, they're not meant to be as an individual item. None of them are meant to be significant works of design in the traditional sense, right? And in that way, I feel that they are also in some ways so generic that they could also be timeless. And so they're not really determined by a particular stylistic approach. They're not determined by, whether curves are in season this year. And so if they are in fact timeless and if they are in fact generic and just like little building blocks, right, which become invisible as soon as you start using them, that's a nice thing because that also adds to our story of longevity of our products, right? So stylistically, something gets old, you're going to stop using it, then you're going to toss it or whatever. We don't want you to do that. right? So we'll make really simple stuff that will last a long time precisely because it's never dated.
I know that you are your sharpest critic, and you constantly are thinking about how to do things better. And you obviously started with a hypothesis. Clearly, certain things have turned out the way that you want. Talk us through some of the failures or some of the learnings, and what you could do better, or what you're already starting to do better with what you've learned over the last 3 years.
So maybe I can illustrate this through an example, right? So we produce our products for India. We make them here in India, actually in Goa. And the manufacturer that we picked, besides their technical expertise, we wanted to make sure that everything is produced in a really good way, right? So what is the factory like? What is the shop floor like? Is it properly illuminated? Are people tripping over themselves? Or do they have enough space to work and to breathe? Are they paid properly? Do they have safety gear? And all of those things were really, really important to us. And these guys met those criteria, right? I mean, they're enthusiasts themselves. I mean, they're running the factory not just because they're running a business, they're running it because they really like making things, right? So it's one enthusiast group working with another, and that's great. Now, when we manufacture our products in the US, we're looking for very similar things. We're essentially the same thing, right? So what is the shop floor like? How are the people treated? What are they paid? And then we find out that when we make identical sets of products in the US versus making them in India, in the US, they cost about 3 times more than they do in India, right? And this is in spite of the fact that we use one material, we use 2 processes. It is almost entirely automated. But still, there's this massive difference, right? And this massive difference exists because there is a human component at every level or every stage. So when steel is made in India versus the same steel being made in the US, there is a difference in the salaries that people are made, right? There are certain environmental standards that are met that makes those things more expensive. The people who slit the steel into rolls or sheets are paid in a certain way, and they work in certain facilities. And you extend this to trucking and shipping and logistics and manufacturing, and by the time you're done, it's almost like these 2 things are from different planets. Now, one reaction to this might be to be shocked and say, that's ridiculous. We're going to make all of our stuff in China and we're going to ship it all over the world, which is kind of the standard model, right? Apple does it, everybody does it. And I think that's shameful in our time, because the reason that you're able to produce things cheaply on the other side of the globe is because, people are making less money. They are living very difficult lives in order to make, the massive profits that you're generating on this side. And it just doesn't seem like the right thing to do, right? Especially when you are selling your products in economies where people can afford to pay more money, right? And so it's through this personal experience and we've become extremely mindful of the true cost of doing things. Because that when something is too good to be true, it usually is. And now we know at a very fundamental level how that works. We often encourage people to buy less stuff than they come to us for. So in a way, we've kind of designed it so that quantities don't really make a massive difference. But you're right. I mean, of course, economies of scale still exist. It's just, and sometimes when you need those quantities, of course, you do them. But if you don't need those quantities, then I don't think, you want to push them on people just because they're cheaper. So in that way, I don't think it would serve anybody for us to be either too precious or to be very close about what we're doing, because obviously we think it's a good thing for better stuff to be out there. And so we're completely open to collaboration. At the same time, we don't feel that people should be buying stuff if they don't really need to buy it.
Yeah.
And so we also encourage people to hold back in that way. It's an unconventional sort of business model, and to some people it might seem kind of foolish, because if you're really trying to push, as much quantity out there,
right.
But we think that in the long term, I think it's the better model. And if you're not sort of super greedy about it, then I think it's time to try it.